Hello everyone, it's Samarth again. Hope you are all having fun in the camp and doing good mathematics. Today we are going to have the second lecture of the lecture series Simplifying Complex Numbers. Let's just recall what I did in the first lecture, what I covered, and then later I'll be telling you what we're going to do in this second lecture, and finally giving this small bit of mine as to how you can maximize your camp experience. So, first of all, what did we do in the first lecture? In the first lecture, I talked about the number systems, what we think of numbers as, and I didn't do much of it, but then later you had a lecture separately by Svensson, I guess, who talked about the construction of number systems and so on. From there, in the first lecture, I gave you the motivation as to why the numbers that you already know are not sufficient, and gave you some sort of motivation using field theory, polynomials. If you recall, we defined a set of real numbers as a field, and then later said that we needed an algebraic closure of that field through polynomials, and we went to complex numbers. Then I defined complex numbers using this A plus ID representation, where A and B are reals. We dealt with that. Then we defined some operations, addition and multiplication. We tested whether it's a field, and then I told you to check the proof for yourself that it's a field, that it's a closed field, that any polynomial from that field has roots in it. After that, we went to we checked that it's a field. As I told you, you have to check the field, you have to prove that it's a closed field by yourself. And then later we went to checking that whether it's an extension of real numbers. Then later we checked whether we check the operations, whether it was the same for real numbers as we defined it for complex numbers. Then we had the representations defined A plus IB and Z bar I theta. And then more importantly, we had some properties defined for the complex number or the complex plane, that is the modulus, then the argument and conjugate, and some more properties and few more problems we discussed. Problems, I mean some problems which I left saying those are for you to continue. And then afterwards we went on to talk about a very fun result that you would have, I said you had seen, which was e power I price minus 1. Then we went to e power I theta representation, which used a little bit of trigonometry. And then later this representation came up, that is the polar coordinate representation. And then after that we talked about the checking of square root using this representation, which was the whole idea why you ever thought of expanding. And then later from here we went to cube roots of unity, and I said that they have interesting properties in algebraic identities, and yeah, that was more or less what we did in the first lecture. In the second lecture, what we'll be doing is continuing with the cube roots of unity, and then I'll be talking about the algebraic identities, how we use cube roots of unity to understand algebraic identities better. And then we'll be looking at an interesting theorem called the De Moivre's theorem, using this representation of complex numbers and a little bit of trigonometry. And then after that, as I said in the first lecture, we'll be looking at a few of the applications of the theory of complex numbers. So that we will do here. We will try to learn some properties of geometry, and how to look at geometry in terms of complex numbers is what we'll be doing in this part of the second lecture. That is what pretty much we'll be doing in the second lecture of this lecture series. Now coming to my bit of telling you how to maximize the camp experience. I'm not going to say much, it's just attend all the lectures, utilize this opportunity, attend the mentorship sessions, and all the extra sessions that we've planned. Try to make the best use of it. That's all for the introductory part of the lecture. Before moving ahead and continuing the plan that I said, to just get familiarized with how to solve equations, complex equations, and deduce some things about some complex numbers in an equation. Again, I'm just repeating the same thing, but to make sense of that and those stuff, let's just solve a question so that you know what are the general tricks or get an intuition as to which representation of complex numbers you have to use and so on. So I have a question in mind, that is z square plus mod z equal to 0. Solve this for z in complex. You have to solve this equation for z in complex numbers. You can pause the lecture and try. Although I would recommend you to look at this one example solution first. So as you solve more problems, you realize that for this kind of questions, the best representation is the Cartesian representation. So let's just assume z is equal to x plus I by say. So let's just substitute this over here. If z is x plus iy, what is z square? It's x plus iy the whole square plus mod z. Mod z in this case, by the definition of it, would be the square root of x square plus y square. Now this must be equal to 0. This is equal to 0 is equal to 0. This is equal to 0. Now let's just expand this term. You will get x square minus y square plus 2ixy with the plus square root of x square plus y square, whole thing equal to 0. Now, as I said in the initial lecture, we'll be using this fact of equality of complex numbers while solving complex equations. What did I say? For two complex numbers to be equal, both the real part and the imaginary part must be correspondingly equal. So in this case, because x and y are real numbers by the definition, this whole part, this whole thing in this circle or whatever, is real, right? Because this is positive and these both are real, and this is strictly imaginary because these both are real. But on the other right hand side, both the real part and the imaginary part are 0. So we have to equate them now. One is this is equal to 0 and the other is this is equal to 0. Let's just go use this fact first because as you solve more problems, you realize that xy equal to 0 means you can make better use of that statement. So 2ixy equal to 0 gives us either x must be 0 or y must be 0. One of these, at least one of these must happen. So let's assume x equal to 0. If you assume x equal to 0, in this equation, what can we say about y? We'll have minus y square. We have this thing to be equivalent to minus y square plus square root of y square, which is mod y. This is equal to 0. How do you solve this? This is very similar to this equation, but there is a slight difference. In this case, we are solving for y real, and now you can do a small trick by saying that y square is nothing but mod y the whole square, and so this is just a quadratic in mod y, which you can easily factorize as mod y into 1 minus mod y equal to 0. So either mod y is 0 or mod y equal to 1. So mod y is equal to 0 or mod y equal to 1. Similarly, you can deduce something for the case that y equal to 0. You will get x square plus mod of x equal to 0. I'll just write it here. For this is this part. This one is over here. Sorry for the whole mess. It's a small word. So y equal to 0, you will have, substituting in the equation, you will have x square, which you will again write as mod x the whole square, plus mod x equal to 0. Okay, here you needn't solve it as a quadratic. You can easily notice that this is positive and this is positive, and so this must for two, this is non-negative, this is non-negative, and this is 0. So for them to be equal, both of these must be 0, and for that to happen, mod x should be 0, which implies x must be 0. So if y is 0, it will force x to be 0. That's what we know. If y is 0, then x must be 0. And if x is 0, we know that mod y is either 0 or mod y is 1. Mod y is 0, again is simply that y is 0, which we have already counted. And another is mod y is 1. Now let's just substitute and just check whether this solution works. Whether all such solutions work. That is, you take any form, any number of this form. Okay, so x equal to 0, y equal to 0 is the complex number 0, right? And x equal to 0, mod y equal to 1 is something we'll have a look at. Oh yes, we can also deduce one more thing from this, that y is either plus 1 or minus 1. Yeah, and both of the solutions, x equal to 0, y equal to 1 gives you the complex number I over here, x equal to 0, y equal to minus 1 gives you the complex number minus I. So we have three candidates for solution, that is 0, I and minus I. You can substitute all of them back into the equation and check whether they satisfy the equation. 0 obviously does, 0 plus 0, 0. I is I square minus 1 plus the mod of it is 1. So minus 1 plus 1 is 0. Similarly, minus I mod is 1, whole square is minus 1. Minus 1 plus 1 is 0. So the three candidates that we had satisfy, and hence we have three solutions. I just wanted to just go through this and just see, even if it's a very easy question, what are the steps that we generally use to solve complex equations? Because one might be clueless, because these are some stuff which you just get used to, like equating real and imaginary part and taking the representation. Yeah, pretty much those are the only two things that we did in this problem. I will be doing another problem. It looks very similar, but after that we will continue with the algebraic activities that I talked about using cube-roots of unity. The next question that we'll be discussing is a very simple one. If you use the same trick that I used in the previous problem, that is Cartesian representation and then equating real and imaginary parts. But I want to give this problem because it uses some other trick also. It's very nice. So the problem is z square plus mod z square equal to 0. Solve for z in complex. I encourage you people to stop the video and try. You can have your own solution using the Cartesian representation. I am assuming that you've tried, and I'm going to continue. This is a nice question because you can use this property here. Whenever there is a mod z square, you can use that property that we deduced the other day, that is mod z square equal to zz bar. So let's use that. So we can write this as z square plus zz bar equal to 0. Now factorizing this, we will have taken z in common. We have z into z plus z bar equal to 0. It neatly gave us this one small equation. The product of two things is 0. So either z is 0, that's an obvious case, or z plus z bar is 0. But we already learned something about z plus z bar, that it's a real number. So if z is a plus ib, then this is 2a. 2, let's just say it has 2 real of z. So if 2 real of z is 0, then real of z is 0. If real of z is 0, which means it doesn't have a real part, it only has an imaginary part, then either z is 0 or it's a purely imaginary number. So z is 0, but that case has already been taken care of, or z is some real number times I. It's just a purely imaginary number. Okay. Although an easy problem, I just wanted to apply this small trick. Yes, now we can safely move ahead to cube roots of unity. So as I said, we will be continuing with the cube roots of unity and its application in algebraic identities. So let's just take a specific one. Before which, let's just recall what the whole cube roots of unity thing was. this z cube minus 1 equal to 0 solutions are 1 minus 1 plus root 3I by 2 and minus 1 minus root 3I by 2. This is called omega. It's just a great letter to simplify this, and if you square this, you will realize you get the other root, and so this is omega square. So 1 omega and omega square. So these are the three cube roots of unity. So you can just try and multiply the three roots. You have omega cube, which should be equal to 1, because you can substitute omega here and you'll get omega cube equal to 1, and also by Vieta's theorem the product of three roots must be minus of minus 1 by 1. So omega cube equal to 1, and after that we can also look at properties like the sum of roots must be 0, because again Vieta's theorem there's no z square term, so it's 0. So 1 plus omega square is 0, which also you can predict by just substituting omega as z, and you'll have omega cube minus 1 equal to 0, and so omega minus 1 into omega square plus omega plus 1 equal to 0. Omega is not 1, and so this must be 0. So yeah, such properties you can easily deduce from cube roots of unity, and because such cubes are quite common in algebraic identities, and square is very trivial, that is z square equal to minus 1 or z square equal to plus 1 are both trivial solutions, this cube roots of unity becomes rather special. So okay, let's see in algebraic identities how it's used. Before that, just to get the trick of how we are going to use, let's just try and solve this equation. Z cube minus 8 equal to 0. What is the solution of this equation? What are the solutions of this equation? The trick is simple. Substitute z as 2z naught. So it's 2z naught whole cube minus 8 equal to 0. So this is 8z naught whole cube. Take the 8 common and cancel it. You will have z naught cube minus 1 equal to 0. And now you notice that the solutions for this equation are just the cube roots of unity. And so the solution for this equations are just 2 times the cube roots of unity. So the roots are 2 omega square. By the way, just to note, omega is the one that's on top, because minus 1 plus root 3I by 2, and this is omega square in the representation of the cube roots of unity on the complex plane. So yeah, so this is the basic trick. Whatever you have over here, you just substitute the cube root of it over here, the real cube root, and then you get back to cube roots of unity. Why is this important? Is because you can factorize something you thought you couldn't factorize before into something simple. Some algebraic identity like say a square minus ab plus b square. This is surprisingly simple. Let's say plus a. Okay, a square plus ab plus b square. The factorization of this is surprisingly simple. It's just a minus b omega times a minus b omega square. Just with this extra omega, we can factorize it into linear factors. This is in some way expected that you can. The ability to factorize this into linear factors using complex coefficients is in some way expected, because if you think about it carefully, the whole point of expanding real numbers to complex numbers was so that the field becomes closed, which means that the polynomials could be split, which means they could have roots. Right? So in some sense you already know that you can factorize. Okay, if that didn't make sense to you, you can just ignore it, but that was some type of intuition that I was trying to give. So how do I prove this? Let's just have a look at this identity, a cube minus b cube. Let's just solve this for equal to 0. Okay, so for this to be 0, this is some what we try to do is something like we did over there in the case of z cube minus 80. That is, you just somehow make this of this form, x cube minus 1 equal to 0. So I leave this to you people from here, because I already gave the trick using z cube minus 8 equal to 0. You have to just write this this equation in terms of this, and then you will be able to prove that this is equal to this. Okay, so that is an exercise for you people. I will now give another identity. Like we just had the identity before, similarly you can also get this identity. That is a cube plus b cube is a plus b into a plus b omega times a plus b omega square. Just another simple identity. Just like with the minuses, here it's with the plus. Okay, proving this is also a part of your exercise. I will not be giving explicit exercises in terms of PDF, so I thought of this, giving this algebraic properties as homework to you people. So the previous one and this one are a part of the exercises. Well, I am also adding another identity as the part of the exercises, which is a cube plus b cube plus c cube minus 3abc is equal to a plus b plus c, a plus b omega plus c omega square times a plus b omega square plus c omega. This uses some other tricks, but I don't want to do this. I'll just leave it to you as homework. It's a nice problem. This one and the previous one are very simple because it just used the trick I gave you. This one is like your star homework. You need not submit, but I highly recommend that you try these problems. So that was it about cube roots of unity. I'm not going to dwell more into the application of that specific topic or idea in algebraic identities, although you are free to explore, and there's definitely a lot to explore. Now we'll be moving on to a theorem that I said I would cover, which is very nice in terms of trigonometric application. It's called the De Moivre's theorem. So there are three statements in the theorem. The first statement is cos theta plus I sin theta. Maybe I just write the name of the theorem first. D theorem. Not really sure of the spelling, which is why at first I didn't want to write it. Yeah, but yeah, just so that people can check it out later. So the first statement is that cos theta 1 plus I sin theta. Okay, I'm just going to write index it. Cos theta k plus I sin theta k. The product of all such quantities where k varies from 1 to say n is equal to cos of sum of k varying from 1 to n of theta k plus I times sine of sum of k varying from 1 to n of theta k again. Yeah, so this is the first result. To make sense of it, it's cos theta 1 plus I sin theta 1. Say z1. Yeah. Complex number z1 times z2 times z3 and so on up to zn is a complex number which is cos of the sum of all the arguments plus I times sine of the sum of all the arguments. That's all. It's a really simple statement, but if you go to write it, you will need to write it in such a long manner. But the statement is rather simple. The second statement is this one. You can write it in a rather simple manner. Cos theta plus I sin theta whole to the n is cos n theta plus I sin n theta. The third statement, something I'll leave you guys to prove, because I've already taught how to do this cube roots infinity, whose concept is rather clear to you people, I hope, and you people have already learned the exponential representation. And with using this and this theorem, the last statement is will be challenging problem, but I'm still going to leave it to you guys. It will be a really interesting one for you people to do. It says, the third statement says that cos theta plus I sin theta whole to the power n over q, where n and q are both integers. Here, of course, n is integer. Just to make it clear, even here it definitely has to be an integer. Here again, here it's not mentioned, but yeah, n is an integer. So cos theta plus I sin theta whole power n by q has one of its value as cos n by q theta plus I sin n by q theta. So yeah, these are the three statements. First one I'll be proving. Second one I'll tell you how. Just the first one. You should notice second statement is just a consequence of this. If you just take the same values of arguments of theta 1, if you take all theta k's as theta, you get the second statement. So this is just like a corollary of statement 1. Although you can just write this in another statement. Statement 3 is homework. I'll be proving this next. Statement 3, I'll just repeat it if it's not clear. Cos theta plus I sin theta whole power n by q has one of its value as cos n by q theta plus I sin n by q theta. Now I will try and prove the first statement of De Moivre's theorem. So the statement was cos theta 1 plus I sin theta 1 times up to cos theta n plus I sin theta n is that product. We will just arrive at the result. We will do it in the following manner. We will write all these as complex numbers, z1 so on up to zn. So we want the product of this. We will write z1 in exponential representation instead of Cartesian representation. So as you may all notice, sin square theta 1 plus cos square theta 1 is 1, and so the modulus of this, all these complex numbers individually taken is 1, and so all these numbers are of the form e power I theta 1 times e power I theta. So the first one is e power I theta 1, second one is e power I theta 2, and so on up to e power I theta n. So the product is just this. This you can write as e power, the sum of all that, taking I common, you get e power I times theta 1 and so on up to theta n. This, on writing it again using the exponential representation, where modulus is 1, you will get cos of sigma theta k 1 to n plus I times sine of sigma theta k 1 to n. There you have it. The first statement of the De Moivre's theorem is there. You can just put the same values of theta k and have the second statement, and as I said, the third statement is for you people to solve. So as I said, after De Moivre's theorem, we will go to studying geometry, applications of complex numbers in geometry. So already we've seen something that we can do in using complex numbers, some shape shifting stuff that we've already seen. So one of them is translation, that is if you subtract the numbers moved like vectors. Initially I'll just speak and then later I'll give you the intuition, so if you can follow, try to follow. Then later we also saw the rotation, how we could rotate easily. I don't want you to understand this technically while I'm speaking, just I'm pointing out things that you can do which changes shape. So rotation was one of those things. Also using conjugate we saw we could reflect numbers across the x-axis. So basically using these ideas we'll try to do something formal, that is reflection and rotation, using the ideas of translation. And then later we'll look at collinearity and perpendicularity. Using collinearity we can say whether something is a triangle or not, and we'll talk about such stuff. And then later on the unit circle, we also saw about the unit circle. On the unit circle we will try to use these concepts and solve one example. So yeah, this is the basic gist of how much geometry we are going to cover using complex numbers. So first things first, we'll just look at what type of rotations we've seen so far. So if you had a complex number z, you multiply by I, it rotated by 90 degrees. This is something we saw in the first lecture. So this basic idea we will be trying to use. So first thing, first I will try to solve this problem. Say this, we'll learn through problems, geometry. That's how I'll be trying to do this part of the lecture. So say you have this number w and you have this number z. You want to create a perpendicular, find a point which is perpendicular to this one at some distance, say. How do you basically go about doing this? So yeah, the trick, what we try to do is first we try to translate this whole line to the origin. Okay, the basic gist is this thing, we are trying to translate first, and then using this idea of rotation we try to rotate, and then we translate back. Okay, translate, rotate, translate. Okay, let's call this D. I want to find something that is at a distance 2D and perpendicular. Okay, we are trying to rotate and magnify. So we translate, rotate and translate. That's the basic idea. So how do we translate? Translation just happens by subtraction. These are some vector ideas that I am using. You guys can pause the video and try to prove each step that I am doing. And but if you already learned vectors, then you can easily follow. But okay, let's do it this way. So when you subtract w, I'm just wanting to subtract w because at that time this whole complex plane translates such that the origin becomes w. That's the basic idea. So this will be 0, this will be z minus w, and yeah. Now we want to have a rotation of this by 90 degree multiplied by 2. We want the mod to multiply by 2, but it to rotate by 90 degree. So we have to multiply by 2i times z minus w. Nice. But this is the how do you say, the representation of that complex number which you get by rotating by 90 degree and all that, with origin as w. You want origin to go back to 0. So what we do is we just add a w to go back to this point. Simple. So this point is 2i times z minus w plus w. So this whole idea of translating and rotation is what you want to get used to. But this is a way how we can use complex numbers. Basically the idea, if you may have already noticed, is just forget the points and call them as complex numbers and use the operations to move them around. Okay, that's the whole gist. Next, I will try to show reflection. Say I want to reflect a point about a particular line segment. How do I go about doing that? I mean, that's the most fundamental thing you can do, right? In terms of reflection. You have a line, you have a point, you want to reflect the point about the line. Say you have A, B and Z. You want to have the W which is over here, the mirror image. How would you go about doing this? Again, I want you to pause the video. What and all do we know? We know how to reflect stuff by just taking conjugate. We know to rotate stuff, we know to translate stuff. So I want you to construct a sequence of steps that we can follow to formally get the complex number that represents this point. Okay, if you have tried, I will go about telling the sequence of steps that we should follow. First of all, we want to end up reflecting, right? We want to end up, the last thing we'll be doing is taking conjugate and then reversing the whole thing, right? So we have to take a conjugate, but for that we need to bring this thing over here, right? We want to bring this whole line segment over here and then reflect about it. Okay, by the way, you have to just interpret this as a line. Z could be here also, and in that case you have to just take the reflection about the line. So yeah, we want to align this line which is generated by the line segment with the x-axis, right? So first we just translate. We bring the axis complex plane here. So at that time this becomes 0. Okay, the diagram is getting messy. Okay, but anyways, if it's too messy, I'll redraw it. It's becoming 0. This is becoming b minus a. This is becoming z minus a. Okay, in this coordinate axis. Now you want to bring b minus a down. How do you do this? Right, it's simple. You just divide by b minus a. If you divide by b minus a, this aligns with 1. Right, and then if you take the conjugate, you will have the conjugate of this point with respect to this line segment. So we'll just divide by b minus a. So what do you get at that point? You get 1, and you'll have this complex number z minus a over b minus a. Now we want the reflection of it. Let's call this number, say, x. The reflection will be x conjugate, right, naturally. But this is not the answer that we want. We don't want the conjugate. We don't want x conjugate. We want to see what the conjugate represents in the initial configuration. So to go back to the initial configuration, what do? We multiply by b minus a because we divided, and then we add a, bring it back to the initial origin. So we have x conjugate times b minus a, right? Yes, and you add a to it, where x is this thing. This is what will be the reflection of z across AB. So let's just look at what the final answer is. The final answer is this thing. We substitute x over there. So we have z minus a by b minus a whole conjugate times b minus a whole conjugate times b minus a plus a. So z1 by z2 whole conjugate is z1 conjugate by z2 conjugate. If I have not already shown that in the properties, you can just pause and do it. It's rather simple given how much you already learned. So we have this conjugate over this conjugate. Then again z minus a whole conjugate is z conjugate minus a conjugate, b conjugate minus a conjugate. So doing all this integration, we have z conjugate minus a conjugate by b conjugate minus a conjugate times b minus a plus a. You again just multiply this b conjugate minus a conjugate with this thing, and you will have your answer in a simplified form. It's not a very simple form, but that form is something you would want to recall and keep it in your memory, because generally in Olympiad problems, if you want to do complex bashing, as they say, that is using complex numbers to solve geometric problems, you will be generally needing to recall at least this. This is one of the bare minimums. So we learnt about reflection, got an idea about translation, and some idea about rotation also. So although not for an abstract angle, but it works in a very similar manner. But yeah, complex numbers is not really good for for abstract angles, unless there are some other properties involved which you can make use of. Yeah, great. Now moving on, as I said about collinearity and perpendicularity, which is the next thing that we'll be covering. So first thing we'll go with collinearity and whether it's a triangle or not, and answer such questions. So say you have 3 points ABC represented by complex numbers ABC. When do you say ABC are collinear, or when do you say they are not? So yeah, simple question. So say, yeah, I'll let you guys think about it. And yeah, you first think about it. Okay, I hope that you've thought about it. So what we are basically looking at is trying to make AB and BC, trying to get a condition when they make an angle of 180 degrees. Okay, and we are somehow trying to use the fact that 180 degrees will give you -1. That is the complex number with the argument 180 degrees -1. It could also be +1 if the angle was 0. So the whole, so it's, if it's 180 degree, if it's A, B and C, if C is on the other side, then you have angle 0, in which case it will be a positive real number, right? So basically the gist is that this ratio that we are looking at, or this angle that we want to get, should be a real number. Should be an argument which only a real number can have. So basically the argument of this line segment or vector, you may say, minus the argument of this vector is something that we want to be that of a real number, to be an argument of a real number. Okay. So let me just write it more clearly. Say the three numbers are over here and they're collinear, A, B, C. What I'll do is just shift the coordinate axis to A, have this as 0, so B minus A, this is C minus A. And now it's simple, right? You guys can just look at what the condition should be, which is that C minus A over B minus A must be a real number. It may be on the other side to be negative also, but all it has to be is a real number. So C minus A over B minus A must be a real number. And if you would have paid attention in the previous lecture, and you'll be able to recall that a condition for a number to be a real number is that Z should be equal to Z bar. And maybe I didn't do it as a property or something, but you guys can notice that if Z equal to Z bar, then Z is definitely real. Alright, you guys can try proving that. So this being real condition can be just written as this equal to its complement. And again, using the previously learned steps, you can simplify this condition. So yeah, this is the condition for collinearity. C minus A over B minus A whole conjugate is C minus A over B minus A. Next we'll be learning about, but before that, a small note. This is the same thing as saying whether three complex numbers form a triangle or not, and you can answer such questions. Those are simple applications that you can come up by yourself. So next we'll be learning about perpendicularity, and I said that one example that involves the unit circle. So now that we have the collinearity criteria with us, we will try and deduce the criteria for perpendicularity. So say we have two line segments AB and DC, and we want to find the criteria which says when they are perpendicular, the two line segments. So we'll just try to look at it in the previous manner, how we did it in the previous steps. What we want to see is whether this, somehow we can compress this to something near the origin, translate this to something near the origin, and also translate this something to, basically what I want to do, what I'm saying is that we want C and A both together to be at the origin, because then we can just check whether one is the multiple of the other by a complex number, which is 90 degree or 270 degree, that is I or minus I. In which case, which is the only case when they can be perpendicular. So how do we do that? The thing is, we can't do that if we are just looking at it as complex numbers, because we can't, because these are different complex numbers, we can't have both of them at the origin. But we can if we are looking at them as vectors. So here is where we are using the vector knowledge. To subtract, if you look at these as just the directions and magnitude, but that they remain the same with translation, we will directly get this picture, that is B minus C and B minus C. Okay, you just subtract A and subtract C, and translate this, assuming it's a vector. We like this step is not really justified. You can look more about this later, which is why I'm not going into the depth of it. But yeah, this is the basic gist, that you look at it as vectors and you translate both of them to the origin. And now see whether one vector is a multiple of the other by a complex number. So for that we just divide the two numbers, b minus c by b minus a, and check whether this is a complex number, that is I or minus I or any multiple of those two numbers. So here we use that condition which says if z is equal to minus z bar, if and only if z is equal to minus z bar, then z is an imaginary number. So that we will use, and with that we will get the criterion to be d minus c by b minus a equal to minus d minus c by b minus a whole conjugate. This is the criteria for four numbers a, b, c, d to form line segments which are perpendicular to each other. Again, the part where both of them are treated as vectors, if you know vectors, then it's easy for you to understand. Otherwise, you have to just think about it a little. It is just that when you are subtracting by a, you will translate this thing, this line segment here, but this will be translated to somewhere else. And even if it is already perpendicular, it won't come to the origin for you to check it. But in terms of pure complex number, you can just see it as once you rotate it, it's just getting multiplied and translated again. Okay, which is why there's a minus c. So you can also look at it in the hard way and try to reduce the same result, but vectors is a much easier way, so you can try to learn that and then understand this result. So this is the criteria for perpendicularity. Next I will as I said, I will solve one particular example just to see how it actually works, how you can actually use these techniques to solve some geometry problem. So suppose there is a unit circle, and you want to find a criteria for these complex numbers to form chords which are perpendicular to each other. Suppose that is the criteria you want to find. So I encourage you people, this is a unit circle, okay? Yeah. Which means this is one and the center is at the origin. So I encourage you people to pause the video and try to solve this yourself. It's an interesting problem, and moreover you can just solve it based on what we've already learned. Okay, so I'm assuming you people have tried. I'll try to give the solution now. So basically you have to use the same fact that we had previously, that is two segments being perpendicular. B minus c over b minus a is minus d minus c over b minus a whole conjugate. But the speciality over here is that we know something about a conjugate or bb conjugate or cc conjugate or dd conjugate. That is, all of them are equal to their modulus square, which in this case is 1. So a is 1 over a conjugate, b is 1 over b conjugate, c is 1 over c conjugate, d is 1 over d conjugate. So simplifying this, let's just take the minus to the other side. We have d conjugate minus c conjugate over b conjugate minus a conjugate. D is 1 over d, d conjugate is 1 over d, c conjugate is 1 over c, b conjugate is 1 over d, a conjugate is 1 over a. So you have a minus b, or you have a minus b, c minus d, which is equal to d minus c over b minus a, d minus c over b minus a, with an ab at the top and a cd at the bottom. So these two quantities we can easily cancel, unless it is the case that d equal to c. But let's assume that all the points are different, so these are not zeros and you can just cancel them. So it's minus 1 equal to AB over CD that we get, from which we get AB plus CD equal to 0. A very nice result for a 4 points on unit circle of which two form chords for them to be perpendicular. It could also be in some other way, that is, you could join other chords, they might intersect outside also, like say these two chords, they intersect outside and you call this A, this B, this C, this D. Even in this case it satisfies. It is not necessary that the intersection is inside the circle. So yeah, this is an interesting result and application of what we will learn until now. And this will be the most that we'll be delving into applications of complex numbers in geometry. I hope I have dealt enough and you've learned something interesting in geometry using complex numbers.